Under the false pretense that the sun rises tomorrow, under the assumption that emptiness is always hollow, under the disguise of a leader that we followed, under the pressure that keeps us blinded in the sorrow. When it all crumbles down, we are quick to scream disaster and throw the baby out with the bathwater after. The impact of a joke is usually measured by the laughter, and every time you fail, it's always give up and never try harder. More, bigger, stronger, longer is what we chant till the door hinge heats up with flaming colours red, yellow and orange, breaks off of the wall and is unattached from the mortgage, and in attempts to be a free man like I was Morgan. We can never escape, but we can try, because without purpose, every day we live is another day that we died. And that is from an unknown reader, or writer, or calligrapher, or typewriter, or documentarianism. But anyway, we're back again, and I just, something about that poem just really strikes a chord. It's one of those things where you write all these different things, and it's so quick to draw our attention to what is going wrong. Because where we place our attention, everything else follows. So if we're only focusing on those things, and that's a really good kind of identifier. That's a really good highlight of where we're placing that attention, and just our perspective on what the situation is going to be like, depending on the perspective or the worldview that we have in those moments. And this is something that people will say to you till the cows come home, is you can only control what you can control. And that's something that I want to talk about a little bit today. So this week was a little bit crazy. A lot was going on. And it ended up being a lot different from my usual weeks. But it's hey, I took it on the chin, and I just saw it as a really good way to actually develop who I am and multiple facets of who I am. So that's something that I'll get into this week. But before I start, I just want to give a shout out to Ricky Persico. So Persico Performance, he's been my coach. He's also been a guest on this podcast. And this is a little ad that I'll do for the guy because I just have so much respect for his systems, so much respect for the programming that he has. So he does my exercise programming. You've probably seen me at the beach. You've probably seen me in some throwback pics. And you're probably wondering, like, how the heck does he only look like he's 16? He's got the joints of a flexible teenager, but you wouldn't know that I'm almost 56. So that's basically because I have someone who understands the needs of my sport, as well as understands the kind of the what I have going on day to day. I'm a full-time worker. I sit a lot, and he's trying to make sure that he understands how my body moves, and he's constantly changing things depending on what it is that I need to do in the week. So I let him know every day, every week. He checks in with me. Sometimes he just asks how I'm feeling. Sometimes he just asks if I'm doing okay as well. He realizes I'm more than an athlete. I'm also a person, and we have really awesome chats. And I think he's a very in touch and personable person. In terms of knowing his stuff, in terms of exercise, it's not just for athletes. He has all walks of life coming to him. So if you are looking for a coach, if you are willing to take that next step into becoming who you want to be, and we're talking about, not just exercising to look a specific way, but I'm talking fresh. Like I'm taking contact for 4 heavy sessions per week, and then this guy is also making sure that my lifts are doing everything to make sure that I'm ready for that contact, but also offsetting the amount of sitting that I do, so I'm feeling great. So besides any injuries that I'll get, which are minimal now because I have this young man keeping me young. So Persico Performance on Instagram, or Ricky Persico anywhere else, look him up, and I suggest you give him a message and just either say that I sent you there, or just go because it's something that you would have done for yourself anyway. So that's my plug for the boy, and I'll probably keep plugging him every week because I really appreciate his services. So let's get into it. We are back, another week of the podcast, and it's slightly different this week, but at the same time, it's exactly the same. You know what it is, baby. Anyway, this week, it's been, wow. I think it's been a bit more full on because I've had so many other things on, and it wasn't until I did this thing called a takeover. So on Instagram, a lot of people do it, influencers for brands. So say Gymshark does a takeover, they'll get all their different athletes to come on and just say, what they do in a week, or they'll do an interaction thing. I tried an interaction thing and then I forgot all about it, so it didn't really happen. But anyway, so Pawpaw, or the office that I work for, so part of that office, the student support side, they did a takeover. So they got staff members to run a different week. So I went through that different week. I went through the week of just gone. So you're listening to this on a Monday. I not recorded, but I shared everything that I did from Monday last week all the way up until now, even including recording this episode. And in it, I was just like, I don't really do too much. I don't really know what it is that I can impart on these different people who are, because it's not just, the people who are viewing the stories, they're people who follow the page. So it's not necessarily just students, although it's majority students, but it's anyone who's kind of had some sort of interaction or they like the content that this page puts out, which is mostly student focused. So I got on the Monday, I introduced who I was, and then I went through, I can't even remember what I did. I think it was like some gratitude stuff. And then just thinking about, as a researcher, what is it that I can impart in terms of knowledge for these different students. So I was going through my process of how it is I write academic papers, and just a few things that I do for myself when I'm reading different papers, and how it is that I how do I manage to get everything that I read, because on average, for most papers that I write, I'll read 30 to 40 articles. So how is it that I keep all of that knowledge succinct and in one place? So what I do is I set up a kind of spreadsheet, and then I just to talk about the method, the authors, the results, and then, just how does that link into whatever the topic is that I'm writing about for that paper. So that was one thing. I did a really cool, I don't know, it might not have been cool, I thought it was cool, but I did a really cool little chat about my, time going into, so who I am, and then my time going into postgrad studies, and then what it was that I actually did for my PhD, and how that all kind of played out. And I just kind of was going back, and I had to, I was posting different photos of different things that had happened, different news articles and different things that had come, so kind of like a throwback of where I was, and then where it is that I am now, and then where it is that I'm going in terms of the different news articles that have come out with the different projects that I'm going to be doing. And when I was doing that, I just realized, in a 28-year period, I have done quite a bit. I started my PhD when I was 23, and then just being 2 years removed from that now, you don't realize how much you do when you're in it. And when you are in it, it's just you just feel like you're going through the motions a lot of the time, unless you have this time to reflect. So that was a really cool, and I think it was more for me than for other people. Maybe other people will see it and they won't want anything to do with any of the stuff that I'm researching anyway. So for me, I feel like it was a really cool exercise that I got to do that, and just show other people, but also show other people that, you can use the tools that we already have. I used Cook Islands dance in my PhD. Most people, when they think about stuff that they do culturally, you never really think about it becoming something that's, can be integrated into university and at the highest level of academia. So that was cool. I got a few messages back, just people saying that's really inspiring, but I didn't do it to be like, look at what I did. I was just trying to let people know that it is a pathway. It is a pathway that you can go through, and that I can be someone that you want to talk to about it. But there's other researchers on my team as well who, when they do their takeover, their research will look completely different from mine. So research is not something, so if you know one researcher, the tenets of the job might be exactly the same, but actually how people go about doing that is going to be slightly different. So that's just something, if you're interested in it. If you're not interested in it, you know a little bit more about me, and that's kind of cool. Another one that I did was I actually talked about statistics and what I actually do with statistics. So we get the problem, we go through all of the different data points, and what people don't realize is that, when some people are getting stats, it's actually quite a huge process. So what I showed people is that you'll get a question, and then from that question, you have to kind of map it out. And it's okay, these are the types of variables we're going to have. This one is a continuous variable, or all these different things based on the way that the numbers kind of present themselves. So that's the first thing, is you have to come up with all these assumptions, and then you have to figure out what models you want to use. And then from that, you then have to see, okay, well, in this model, you can only use these types of variables, but this is the kind of outcome that we want to get. So before you can do all of that, all the models and stuff and all the cool stuff, you actually have to organize your data. And the stuff that we work with, we have millions of data points, because it's every single time one person kind of, registered at something or some sort of healthcare clinic or got some sort of was seen and had to register through the system. And this is over like a 10-year period, and that's per person, and then there's like hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions. So we got to do all of that. And then you have to do flags. You have to do identifiers for like, okay, identify when they did this but not this, and not this and this but this. And you can just see it's a really, really huge process. And when people are talking about statistics and you just see it on Facebook, and I'm like, oh gosh, bro. Like, it baffles me how so many people just assume. And I think that's the problem. That's one problem that I have with so many people having so many voices. Back in the day, you could only hear a few voices, and I'm more for people having the chance to be able to speak. But that's the thing, is like the minority, or it can make it seem like the minority is actually the majority because they're the loudest voices that you actually hear. I just went on a huge tangent, but that's just where my mind's at. But yeah, I got to show what I actually do in terms of statistics, and just thinking about the week that I actually went through, the types of work I was doing, the meetings that I was having, the workshops that I had to produce, because I teach, I do research, I write other papers, I also do statistics for people, as well as being a full-time athlete. So I playing Premier Rugby. We have trainings as much as we do. We also had a game against the under-20s Highlanders, and then we had a training camp this weekend as well, which I'll speak about shortly. But, it's kind of odd how that's how much I do in a week, but I never really sit down and reflect and slow down and just be like, sheesh, you do quite a bit. So, yeah, I'm wondering why I have this sort of energy, and this energy is going to be an interesting point to when I actually speak about what the topic was this week. But before we do get into that, I just want to talk about my training camp really quickly. A lot of people have these kind of mixed perceptions of what it is to be an athlete, and that's absolutely fine. Like, I understand some people don't understand it because we've only been exposed to what we've been exposed to, and most of the time in New Zealand, especially, it's rugby players, and it's usually very masculine. It's a bit of rugby as well, a bit of footy for the boys, and then on top of that, there's alcohol-induced actions, as well as just alcohol as part of that trio. And that's something that's been studied quite often, is the interweaving of all three of those and how it creates kind of its own environment in terms of rugby. Now, I am a rugby player. I do understand that there are these cultures around rugby players, but there's also there's a lot of things that I don't agree with, and that's the culture, and that's kind of a culture that has been perpetuated for a very long time. But in terms of the players and actually being able to become as good as we can, a lot of people think that too much money goes there, possibly as well. But anyway, I'm digressing. What we did this weekend was we had a bye for our first round, which is kind of shit-ass, but at the same time a real blessing. So when you look at the opportunity that it gave us to have a weekend together where we can focus on training, focus on developing ourselves. And one thing I love about our coach is he is very big into developing us as individuals, not just for the team, but also for just for what we're going to go, like the communities that we go into, because we all are part of communities. Our community of practice for Alhambra Union Rugby Football Club is one community of practice, but then we also go out and we influence other communities, and that could be as a representative of AU, but also it can be as a representative of something greater or something else that's external to it. But the skills that he's trying to teach us in terms of being gentlemen, in terms of being, people who will go out and be leaders at some point, is second to none. So a lot of the stuff that we did, very rugby oriented, but at the same time, we had some other things in terms of connection and creating safe environments for us to be ourselves and for us to feel comfortable being vulnerable with one another, which is something that I think not many people see in the sporting space, because, it's always kind of tied with masculinity. But one thing that I really took away from the weekend, and it's something I actually had to get my notebook out for, was talking about, we had a mental skills coach come in. So something I'm really big on is actually developing tools or having tools at my disposal if I do, need some sort of to help me in different situations, and that's mostly situations under pressure. So it's easy to think about it when we think of sport, because sport, you're out there, you're using your skills, and there are going to be times where you're put under some serious duress. But at the same time, you have a meeting that goes wrong, you get put under the pump at work, all of these different things. You have a fight with someone, or something happens and then you have to go interact with someone else. What are the things that we can do to actually be able to become better? And the thing that I loved about this is that he just said it is going to take time. It's not going to look the same for most people. And what have I been saying on this podcast? Pretty much the same thing. I'm coming on here and I'm kind of expressing the types of things, like the overall themes of what I do, but I don't specifically say what I do in case you try it and then you feel like a failure because you tried to do it and then it doesn't quite work for you. But the main thing that I took away from it is the first is you can only control what you can control. So in terms of your locus of control, is internal. So those are the things that you can control. Like how much sleep did you do? Did you actually go over the plays? Did you rest well? Did you eat well on the day of the game? Did you come to the trainings? Did you show up? That's all the stuff that you can control. The external stuff, the ref, how good did the other team prepare? Oh no, so my physio didn't have the thing that I wanted. Like those all based on other people. The weather is not how I trained when I was going to train. Oh no, the ball was the wrong ball. All those different things. But also, these things come into our daily lives as well. So a lot of people blame a lot of external things. And what he was saying, and it was colloquial as well, so that's not an actual number. But what he was saying is that, in terms of if you were to lay on your deathbed, sorry to be morbid, and think about the time that you have spent worrying, being angry about all of the different things that you definitely could not control, you could probably get another couple of years of life, because we're trying to change things that will never be able to be changed, and we're just being angry at it, and we're just a lot of negative energy towards it. So instead of thinking about that end and trying to save that, how about we start controlling the things that we can control right now? And so a lot of the stuff that he talked about, I've spoken about in this podcast, but he just gave it different language. So there's a kind of an optimal space that you should be operating in. And what we say here is there's no good or bad. There's only context. There's a context of when good things are good and bad. For example, when I talk about anger, I talked about anger is the trigger for change. Anger is the thing that's going to push you to actually make a difference, because there's something that has unsettled you, or there is something that is going to put you in a awkward position, right? So if you don't act now, it's going to be bad. And then there's the other side. There's the logical brain, which is when you get the time, like, oh, shoo, lucky I didn't get eaten by that tiger. Now we can look at our campsite. Is this actually safe? This is when we can get logical. If we're logical when something happens like that and you don't react quickly, you're like, let's think about the angle of release. All of that subtle stuff is just going to be like, wow, that was not the buzz. But the main thing, and I'm not sure if we're allowed to... No, I'm going to do it. Anyway, the main thing that he kind of spoke about with us were these 4 C's. And that's 1 being commitment, 2 being consistency, 3 being courage, and 4 being connection. So that commitment, and I think this is going to be everything for all of these people listening to this, just thinking about, if you want to change some sort of behavior about yourself. 1, you need to have commitment to that. You need to commit yourself to it. Everything that you do is a commitment. It's a promise to yourself. And then if you are doing so, like in terms of the promise, people who post it online, and this is why I used to be big at posting things online and saying stuff or telling people, because if you post it, you then have the accountability and you're more likely to do it. But that commitment is you making that promise to yourself. All right. The second is consistency, and it's the small steps that are going to take us closer to our goal. So you can't start unless you have that commitment, but you can't finish unless you have that consistency. Well, that's how I kind of visualize it anyway. So that consistency is showing up every single day and moving yourself towards whatever the goal is that you wanted to do. But that happens in micro steps. It's not going to be one of those things that you show up and do 4 hours of training and then the next day you're just going to be outrageous. I just mean like you pick something small and you slowly chip away at it until it becomes a habit and that becomes a part of you. Number 3 was courage. And courage is the one that I think, you're also not going to start if you don't have that courage. And courage is the thing that's going to make you take risks, but also move you out of that comfort zone. There's a lot of things. It's having that confrontation. It's not necessarily a confrontation with someone, but that confrontation with yourself where you're not only doing the things that you're good at and you're not only doing the easy things. This is where you move into, okay, I got to have this courage. I got to back myself to actually move myself into that new proximal kind of this area of development, right? So if I go in there, I'm going to develop. But if I go in there and I don't back myself, I'm just going to come back out and, I haven't gone anywhere. But going in there is going to give you exposure to things that you can do better. And I think, speaking for myself here, speaking for a lot of people, and comes into the psychology stuff that we used to do, is a lot of it is fear of failure. So a lot of people will do enough, or they'll do tasks where they know that they can avoid failure rather than looking at dominating, right? So the people who have the killer mindset, the ones where they know they've done all that they can do and they're just going to go out there and kill, that's a different mindset. And that's a mindset that if you have courage, you're more likely to do. And courage, which I've read a couple of quotes on it and I'm just regurgitating, and I was probably like sitting on the toilet scrolling. But the more that I read about courage, it's not that there is no fear anymore, but it's just that you do things in spite of fear. And that's real courage, because confidence is where you're not scared of it because it's probably something that you're really, really comfortable with. But courage, that's when you're like, this is the real deal right here. I'm nervous. I might poop myself. I could pee in the shower. I pee in the shower anyway. But I could, this is something where I could lose control. I don't necessarily have all the control over the entire situation, and it's freaking me out a little bit. But that's where the excitement lies. So if you have that courage, that's what's going to push you to the next stage. And the connection is pivotal. The connection is what gives the purpose to everything else. It's what you're connected to. Why is it that you're doing all of these different things? These actions that you're doing, yes, they're individual actions, but what is the greater purpose that it's going to serve in the long term? So that's a very short, sharp chat, and why I wanted to get into those 4 C's. Sorry, actually, on the courage, there was a study that I read, and apparently an optimal kind of difficulty of a task is something that you'd fail. You'd get it 80% of the time. So you have a 20% failure rate. That is optimal in terms of doing something that is going to move you to some sort of learning area. And then that legacy is part of the connection. That's the greater thing that we're going to be serving. And part of that, and part of the mental skills training, and this is something that I've been pushing this for how long? When I go to counseling, when I do all these seminars, when I read all these books, when I listen to these podcasts about becoming better, it's so that I have these tools, so that when I know my weaknesses, having these honest conversations with myself and just getting feedback and just being like, hey man, you're not too good at handling anger. And that's why I've dedicated this whole podcast to it, is I want to be better. I want to come on and I want to have discussions. I also invoke discussions with other people. When you hear the way that I speak about things, you're like, oh wow, I've done this. Have you considered this? And that's how we get better, is by having other people who can see a different perspective, a different view. They can shine a different light on things, because you can only see it one way, because you only have these eyes, and you actually can never see yourself. I can only see reflections of myself. And that reflection is going to be based on what you're thinking about yourself at that moment. So have a little go, have a little think about it. But anyway, why I wanted to bring this up, and I'm so fizzed, like I'm just, sorry, that was a bit intense. But I'm so fizzed. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this episode now is because I know I'm here. I know that my energy is up here, and I can speak about it now without getting too and just like taking myself back through the mud, just like, hey, I'm down, man, and you just like keep talking about it and just taking myself down and down and down. So I'm keeping myself safe, but basically, I've recently had this feeling of like languishing, and I describe languishing as this, like, actually this is a conversation that I've had recently with my counselor, is it's like a very meh, single syllable, just meh, just a sound. And I know a lot of you are listening to this right now and being like, that's where I'm at. And I wanted to speak about this more because I do feel like it's going to be something that is very, very common. But at the same time, just a few things like for why you think it could be you, but also what is it that you can do to get out of it. Because something that I was, never going to allow was to let this feeling stop me from doing other things that I loved. And that's how I knew. So being able to feel, I think, really quickly, and it's probably due to greater awareness, which I'm not putting down or anything, but in terms of mental health, we're still kind of focusing on the wider spectrum, right? The extremes of both sides. So at one end, being depressed, and then at the other end, kind of like being depressed and burnt out, and then the other end being, totally fine and just gravy. The reason why I know this feeling is different from depression is not only because I understand that feeling, but I am still hopeful about where I can be. And like, look at where I am now. I'm optimistic that I'm actually going to be able to get out of that state. So when I am feeling it, I'm just like, oh man, this is pretty heavy. Oh man, I feel like there's this huge weight on me, and it's just like, ugh, you know? But I'm optimistic that I'm going to get better. But at the same time, I'm still super productive. Like, I'm looking for other things that I could be doing when I'm in those sorts of states. In most cases, you know, when the depression comes on, it's like a freaking, someone's got, you know, a pillowcase over your head and just making it really tough to breathe. You know, they're putting a foot on your chest. Not enough that it's squashing you, but it's like pushing on your chest, and you're just like, are you ever going to take this off? And then every time you speak, it's like they're tickling that thing in the back of your throat. And you feel like, am I going to puke? You know, that's that kind of feeling. But I'm still optimistic. Like, I still feel like, okay, once I get out of this, I'm going to still go do that. It just takes me a little bit of extra time to be able to move into those states. I know it's not burnout because I'm thrilled with the work that I'm producing. I know when I get burnt out, it's like, oh man, I can't do anything. I can't even look at my work. But I'm still, the pieces of work that I'm loving, I'm like, yes, I'm like pumping it out. Like, I think it's similar to the optimism, but at the same time, it's like, I'm burnt out with aspects of my job, but like, burnout for me feels like I can't do anything else that I love as well. So I'm still finishing work, and it might not be to the same level of productivity that I've always had, but I'm still thrilled with the amount of work that I'm getting done. So that doesn't seem like burnout to me. But also, when I go to training after work, you know, I'm there 100% focused, switched on. So, you know, it's not necessarily burnout, but it's still this feeling of just like, ugh, like something's pulling me back just a little bit. And that's why I think languishing is something that probably we don't speak too much about, because it's smack bang in the middle, right? It's this weird thing that unless you are feeling either really, really great or really, really bad, we can't just say, oh, I'm feeling normal. You know, I'm just feeling a bit meh. You know, you can't, it's like a weird, you can't say that. You can only say if you're feeling great or if you're feeling like really, really bad. And I don't know if that's like we don't normalize that, or it's like weird to be in the middle, you know? So I don't know if you have those conversations with your friends, but just have a think about that. Is this a thing where when we're in this languishing mood, we either, you know, we say that we're not doing too well, which can also start to, like I said, put that the tension on you not being well and then taking you deeper down? Or is it just that we just like, you know, I'm tired, I'm burnt out, and you're putting it to other things? Maybe we're just languishing. Maybe. And when I freaking figured this out, I was just like, wow, that makes so much sense, because I'm high functioning, right? I can do all of these different things. I'm just not doing it at the rates that I usually would. But at the same time, you know, I feel a little bit guilty, because I'm just like, oh man, I have this gross feeling in me. I'm not giving the best, because some of these things that I'm doing just like not fueling me the way that it should, or not fueling me how I need to be fueled at this moment. And then I get into this serious guilt again, because I'm just like, I'm not doing the best that I can be doing. But when I do it, it's like, it's still pretty good though. And there's this gap between what I know I should be doing and what I'm actually doing. And that's when I get into this kind of procrastination. When I get into procrastination, it's mostly because I'm in that languishing mood. And the languishing comes from either me not being super engaged in it, or just, you know, just being like, you know, nah. And that could be down to not sleeping well. That could be down to, you know, having something else that's going on in my life that's kind of taking over a little bit, and me just using a bit of emotional energy for that sort of stuff. But like I said, it's hard to figure it out, because we are so quick to point towards all of the bad things. So anyway, what I'm saying here is, now that I've been able to put a word to it and be able to have a feeling, this is where we can start to, you know, operate. This is where we can start to be like, oh, well, you know, you name it, you tame it. And this reminds me of The Conjuring. Has anyone seen The Conjuring? Pause for effect. Right. You haven't, or you have. But anyway, on that, to take the power away from the main demon, they name it. And they find out the name of it, and then they just start saying that demon's name, and then bam, gone. Right? You've taken away the scary part, because now we know what it is. So now that I know what it is, and now that I know the signs of when it's about to come, I just say, okay, sweet, I'm languishing now. You know, this might take a little bit of time. Or I start putting my energy into the things that I know will like still be good for me. So like can go for a walk. I can, do my yoga. I can also do other things that are going to progress me in the right way. So I think we always think about productivity as you producing the report, you finishing, the to-do list that you were going to do. But there are all these other things that you could be doing. Like me as admin, I could do some admin stuff. I could pay my bills. No, you shouldn't be paying your bills at work, but most people do. I could be, looking at overheads for different studies. I can start reading if I'm in the mood to read. Maybe it's a reading time and I can just get all the background knowledge for that. Maybe it's just, I can only look at edits right now and just like fine tune different things rather than being a content creator at that point for a different paper, actually conceptualizing a paper. Maybe that's a bit too much for where your brain's at right now. And this is something that I'm loving about getting more in touch with our Te Ao Māori, where we're thinking about, how the moon interacts with our energy. And I know mostly for females, and their menstrual cycles, and actually, something that we as athletes have started to get into a little bit more is actually understanding rhythms of the body. So being able to do that, sometimes I might not be able to write the report that I said I was going to write by the end of the day. But it doesn't mean that I was totally just procrastinating. I was laying dormant. There was stuff going on inside. It was ticking and ticking and ticking that actually did continue to move me closer to my goal. It just didn't look like what I was expecting it to. So in the languishing, as well as doing other stuff that can push you towards it, it's just managing expectations. And it's always going to be like that, because if we just keep believing that we've got to do all these amazing things, I'm not saying pull your expectations all the way down, but in terms of realistic and how you're feeling, the different energies that you have a bit more compassion for yourself, have a bit more grace. You're still doing great things. There's still something bubbling inside of you that wants you to get out of there. And let me just tell you this fun fact that I read in a couple of papers is that you are more likely to be diagnosed as depressed if you are languishing now, you are more likely to be diagnosed as depressed if you're languishing now, more so than those who are already depressed or anxious. The reason why that is because if you are at one end and being depressed and anxious, you're more likely to go and it's more burdensome. It's on you. It's heavy. It's like, I need to go get this. But those who are languishing now are kind of just like meh and carry that meh along with them the whole time. They're less likely to go and seek some sort of service, or they're less likely to do something about it because they feel like, it'll just go away. But if meh carries on too long, that's when you get into those states of thinking there's something wrong with me, it's not quite coming right, and then all of those other things are kind of self-fulfilling prophecies of just like, yeah, you're not. You start feeling more guilt. You start doing less work, and then you start feeling more guilt, and it just carries on and carries on. So what we can do is we can get to a point where we can actually start to see, okay, that's not for me, or that's not for me at this point, but these are the other things that I can do. Something that I use over and over again, and that's why the gym has been so handy for me, and I think for other people it's like guitar, it's writing songs, it's just anything that can give them an outlet. It's finding something that you can move towards mastery. So now that I'm playing a different position for rugby, I've had throwing on my mind. When you're in it, you get into a flow state. Right? That's all you can focus on. And this is, when I say flow state, I'm talking about the stuff that you do where time doesn't matter anymore. All you're doing is focusing on getting this thing right, or as right as it can be. It could be Guitar Hero. It could be gaming, right? So I think if people have these spots, the thing is, we just don't want it to turn into junk flow. So some people will do it to distract themselves from everything else. That's great to a point. If it starts taking you away from your livelihood, if it starts taking you away from your family, we're going to make sure we stay balanced. But sometimes maybe you have to overcorrect before you get it right. But anyway, I'm not telling you that this is your time to go and do other things and just do 10,000 hours all in one. When I'm talking about mastery, I'm just talking about something that you can slowly get better at. Some people, want to do painting. And over time, by you giving that flow, it actually gives you that time to feel like, oh, cool, I am productive, I am doing stuff, I can still do this. And you have that potential and you have that part of you. And that is why when you are languishing, you can show that side of yourself, that you can still be productive. And now, some people probably come back at me and just be like, well, I don't want to be productive. But, there's going to be something like, are you contributing to someone else? Are you contributing to yourself actually getting better and not pulling yourself into that pit? So that's where we're at right now. And I think, just having the pawpaw takeover and reminding myself of the things that I've done to achieve and to be able to be where I am now, it really has taken me out of that. And part of it, I'm just starting to see, what were the things that were my strengths? What were the things that actually got me to this point? Who were the people that were part of that? Because those are the people that I know are part of me becoming better. What were the things that weren't so pretty? And that's when you have proper reflections. And I think that I'm just so grateful for a lot of the people who have allowed me to get to here. I'm so grateful for everyone who continues to listen to this. I'm so grateful to all the people who wrote in. So I actually was feeling a bit meh, and that's why I decided to do this episode. And I wrote it on my Instagram page, and people, saw. I think people see a little bit through what I post. Some people will think, okay, is this just for content, or is he genuinely feeling like this? And maybe a week ago, I was just feeling like this. I was just feeling like I'm just going through the motions, and I wasn't feeling too flash about it. And just after a few conversations with different people, and not putting it all into burnout, because I know quickly I can say burnout it is, but then I look at all of the other things that I'm doing, and maybe I was mislabeling different things, and that's why maybe my techniques or the things that I had or wanted to do weren't quite the right things to be doing. And this is why now I can actually focus on, oh cool, right, now that I've named it, I can tame it, and I can actually start to put the processes in place when I start to notice this emotion creep in. Right? Not many of us know our emotions, know how to name our emotions or feel those emotions, because we've never had the chance to actually properly explore it. So this is all part of that. And I'm so happy that I get to do this with you all, and you've caught me at a really good time, and I'm feeling very good about it. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for my guests. Thank you for checking out my guests as well. They've been awesome, and they have really, really enjoyed it. And I think it's testament to knowing that a lot of you will take stuff away. So I really try to give the best that I can. But anyway, love you all so much. Thank you for checking the episode out again. It has been a sick as podcast as usual, and our first head out will be next week, and we'll be able to give a little bit of reflection on that as well. So love you. Please share this if you can. Take care.